What I do after the conference is I take all the videos, and we have 80 full length and about 600 shorter ones, and I give them titles. So I take all the YouTube videos, I take the original and we put it on YouTube, and then I take shorter ones and I give it a title, and I try to give it a title that'll make it interesting so the viewer likes it. And then every day I check YouTube to see how the video did. What gets a lot of views, what gets a little views. And after doing this for 5 straight years, I have a pretty good idea of what people respond to and what they don't. I can predict which videos are going to do well and what are not, and what kind of titles they like and what they don't. And this is my conclusion. My conclusion is that people are very unresponsive to something that they don't believe will affect them soon. So if you say things like, in 2100, if we don't stop climate change, there's going to be islands that get flooded. That's like saying to people, we're changing the paint from blue to gray. No one, it's meaningless to people. They are not responding to future tenses. The one thing they would respond to is if we told them what would happen to them and what would happen to them in the next 5 or 10 years. Now, it's a tough question because I know we don't know the answer and I know we don't want to make it up, but the really most interesting question that anyone really wants to know is, if nothing significant happened and we kept, creating fossil fuels, what's going to be different about our lives in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? What's going to be different? How is it going to affect us? We live here in Long Island. How will we personally be affected?
I'll start that one since gosh, my head's racing with answers. Off the top of my head, one study by the end of 2019 showed that it's likely that half of the people of India won't have drinkable water to drink by 2030. So now we're inside of 10 years of that. Another way to frame that statistic is that's 1/10 of the global population. So you can't live where there's no water, so where do those people go? What happens in the places where they go? To those people in the food and water supplies, housing, not even talking about jobs. So you can see how these things cascade. Closer to home, the North Slope of Alaska, the permafrost right now, according to a study released just this past fall, one of the doctors I interviewed, the scientists I interviewed for my book on the chapter on permafrost, Dr. Vladimir Romanovsky, showed that the permafrost is melting now at a point already that they didn't expect it to be at for another 70 years. So essentially the entire North Slope of Alaska, where they're talking about drilling, not even talking about the dozens and dozens of indigenous communities living along the coast, mostly the coast there. The whole North Slope of Alaska is in the process of soon to turn into a giant 30 to 40 foot deep cold slush pond. So where do those people go? So now we have American climate refugees. So these are the things that are already upon us. And again, if you live in Paradise, California, and your whole town just burnt to the ground, you're not talking about this in the future tense anymore. And so the question is, I think, when do the food shocks and the prices hit? And I'm sure we're going to hear some more along those lines from Stephen, and the fact that already right now, like Mary Beth just said, that we, if you really understand how dangerous the situation is with Lyme's disease, if you can't go outside your house, well, that's impacting everybody right here in this region right now.
I feel somewhat like the problem of Lyme disease and ticks pales in comparison to what Dahr is talking about. But, what we've seen is but a little hint, I think, of what's to come by virtue of this, army of ticks that is blanketing the planet. And I call Lyme disease the first epidemic of climate change. It won't be the last. And I think there's good reason to call it the first, because we are talking about people by the millions being bitten every year, up to 850,000 in Europe, probably about 500,000 in the United States. It's in China, it's in Australia. It is global, it's in South America. And, you know, we see indications that it's just breaking out all over, and that it's because something is happening to our environment, to our atmosphere. And we've gone through 4 disease transitions since the dawn of mankind. The first being when we went from hunter-gatherers to farmers, and we formed communal societies. And that's when measles and I think it was typhus first emerged, smallpox and measles. Then we had the second transition, and that was when, around the time of Christ, when we started moving around more and trade blossomed. And when people started moving around, they brought rats and lice and fleas, and with that came typhus. Then we had the third transition, where we went and we sort of conquered, put our flag in the new world and brought all sorts of germs to original peoples in those places. We're now in the fourth transition, and we are seeing decade by decade a growing number of emerging infectious diseases. And you can see from the 40s, there was maybe 10, and then the 50s, there was 20, and then we're up to maybe 80 or 90 per decade now. That's only going to intensify, and we have a large responsibility to respond to it, but we can take a lot of blame by what we've done. So we really have to start acting, because there are other ways beyond poisoned water that this is going to manifest itself.
You know, just within the last few years, the world has seen, including the United States, 100-year floods happening, or once in 300-year, some kind of catastrophic weather event, but they're all being collapsed into a few years. So that should be waking people up. And, people who don't live in Florida might think, well, hurricanes may be increasing, but it's not going to hit me. But in the Midwest, there have been catastrophic flooding in western Iowa and eastern Nebraska during this last year that has really wiped out many farmers. Really catastrophic events. Houston has been inundated at least once, I think maybe perhaps twice, but it, as Dahr has emphasized, it's happening. It's happening all over in many different ways. And Mary Beth has just been also documenting some very terrifying ways. So the urgency should be there. And people really have to wake up and realize that we have to make changes. And again, as Dahr mentioned too, even if other areas of the world are getting hit hardest right now, the repercussions of massive population displacement are affecting everybody. Look what happened with the Syrian refugee crisis and how that's destabilized in many ways, not just the Mideast, but the European Union, and then immigration coming from Latin America, creating many tensions here. There's no way to avoid the international stress caused by massive dislocations of people. And that's going to continue as the climate continues to heat up and water becomes more scarce and arable land becomes deserts more quickly. So we really have to think globally, very much so, but act very locally in a manner that is going to have global impacts.